What's up, everyone? Sam Shah here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Really excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. And today we have Adib back with us for a second time. And I'm really excited about this interview because we often get a ton of questions about lateraling from one bank to another bank. A lot of times it's typically maybe students who are coming to us a bit later in their recruiting process, maybe because they just didn't realize they want to do investment banking until they were juniors or seniors, or sometimes maybe they did know they want to do investment banking, but they, try to recruit on their own and it didn't work out. And then now they're trying to figure out if they can still break in. A lot of times when that happens, because of how early the junior summer internship recruiting process happens nowadays, like you basically have to be ready to apply by the first semester of your sophomore year. Like that's when all the elite boutiques and a lot of the bulge bracket banks and even middle market banks start opening their applications. So if you didn't know you want to do banking as a sophomore, or realistically really as a freshman, a lot of times you kind of miss that opportunity, right? And then once you miss the junior summer internships, it becomes significantly hard. It's already hard enough as is, but it becomes even harder to get that full-time offer because the vast majority of the full-time offers go to the interns who did do a summer internship, right? So the DIB is one of our students that basically had very similar situation. And, some of you may have seen his first interview with us from a while back, but for most of you out there who haven't, just to introduce him a little bit, he came to us in the summer of 2023 it was like right after he graduated, and correct me if any of this is wrong, but he came to us right after he graduated from college and wanted to break into banking. And he was, took a while, but eventually was able to break into CIBC. And I believe that was in their debt capital markets group. And then recently after working at CIBC for, I guess, just over a year.
Yeah, just over a year.
He just recently started at Deutsche Bank and switched over. So basically, he was able to go through the lateral process successfully. I myself, back in the day, also lateraled after my first year from Deutsche Bank to Morgan Stanley. And so this is something that, I also have some experience in myself. So I just wanted to do this interview today for all of you out there who are interested in potentially doing something similar down the road. Again, maybe because you found yourself starting a little bit late, or maybe you're behind the eight ball for whatever reason. And, we're just going to try to share some insights along the way on what that process is like. And hopefully you can take some of these insights and incorporate it into your own process, and it'll help you get a better outcome. So anyway, with that said, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today, man. And first of all, congratulations, obviously. I know you just started your new job, and from what you were telling me earlier, it sounds like it's been going well. And so that's very exciting. But, can you maybe dive into your story a little bit more for, most of our audience who don't know anything about how you got to where you are today. Just kind of walk us through that process of when did you start thinking about banking while you were still in college at UT, and then how did everything kind of play out, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, a lot of it kind of lines up with what you were saying earlier. Like through college, the 4 years, like you were saying, there's a lot of pressure nowadays. I even feel like some people know within their freshman year, like second semester. I just wasn't one of those people. My brain wasn't wired that way to kind of like go full in on a career at that age. And it's kind of tough to like if you're trying to keep your options open in college, just like going through consulting process or any other finance process on top of banking, it's like an uphill battle. You can't half-ass any of it. So I never want to put myself in that position. So the real realization that I actually had the inclination to do banking happened post grad. I already had an offer for a non-banking job for full time. So, I think that naturally was better for me, honestly, because I missed like the junior year cycle, obviously, to do investment banking recruiting. Coming into a lateral process, not to get too ahead of it, we can all obviously talk later on, but this part is important to my journey. Having a full time job while doing that first lateral process, getting to CIBC, was actually a positive in a way, even though it was non banking, because your market value is naturally going to be better when you have a full time job. And also, there's less pressure because you're making some type of stable income. Within that first job, I kind of had that realization to join y'all's program and to really go like full in deep into that process. I didn't really think I had like the resources or even knew what were the resources to look at. And that's kind of what your program provided for me. It's that structure. And you kind of need structure for a process like, especially investment banking, but within that lateral recruiting processes. So I went through y'all's program, and I believe the summer of, yeah, you were saying 2023 after I graduated, and I did the program for like 6 months, really like invested my time while I was working and reaching out to people. And I got multiple interviews, but we talked about that in the last interview, so not going to get too much into those. But long story short, after those interviews were happening, I was getting more and more reps, and I was eventually able to land CIBC. Um, and I kind of always knew that I wanted to be. I mean, you mentioned this in your curriculum throughout, like it's all like a lot of people have that desire in general to be at a bulge bracket bank because you're looking at the exit ops, and that's kind of what my thinking was behind that. So that was my end goal being at CIBC. It was like a great stepping stone to be where I am now. And thankfully it worked out. I'm really lucky too. Luck has a big part to do with it on top of hard work. But yeah, I'm happy to answer. That was a lot that we covered and then I want to answer, but happy to answer any questions.
For sure. And yeah, luck absolutely is a factor when it comes to something like lateraling, but just in general with career and
Yeah.
life. But I always tell people like luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? You got to take care of the preparation aspect because if you
Yeah.
don't, opportunities are presented to you all the time, to be honest,
Yeah.
whether you realize it or not. It's just that if you're not prepared for those opportunities, then you'll just miss them, right? And so
100%.
I think, that's credit to you for overcoming all the things you have to overcome to get to this place that you're in now, because I think there's so many people in your situation who realize they want to do banking really late
Yeah.
and then they just don't make it, right? Because either they don't even try to in the first place because they listen to other people who tell them that, oh, forget
I
about
think
it.
it's inconceivable.
Yeah, exactly. Or some people do try and then they just,
Yeah.
don't have the structure, don't have the guidance, and just don't have the know how to make it happen. You mentioned you had a job lined up already before CIBC. Just for our audience's kind of knowledge, like, was that a finance related job or what kind of role were you doing prior to CIBC?
Yeah, it was finance related. It was like a shareholder advisory type of job. A lot of like elite boutiques do that now. They do like executive compensation,
Mm,
like shareholder activism. So it is within, like if you ever end up working in like M&A or the equity side, like it did teach me a lot about like the Dev 14A, like proxy statement stuff. So I was able to like it's always we obviously I don't want to get too ahead again, but it was really about how I crafted my story. That's kind of what your program also really like drills in is like a lot of this is about how you're structuring your story in these answers and I don't personally don't think it mattered what my first job was. It just mattered how I framed it. Nonetheless, it was good. I at least had that job.
yeah, because something like shareholder advisory, it's not really, I mean, yes, there are elite boutiques that do that, but it's like a very niche part of what they
Yeah,
do, right?
exactly. I didn't mean, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's not very related to what we actually do in banking now that
Yeah.
I'm in it, for sure. Like, I think there's like a small, tiny section of like the Series 7 that covers that stuff. Like, but yeah, to your point, it wasn't very banking related.
No, and the point I wanted to make is exactly what you said, which is some people think that you have to do something that's already super like A related or, capital raising related, which obviously, yes, if you have something like that, that's even more ideal, right? Like
Yeah,
if you have a valuation role or if you're working at, I don't know, in like corporate development or whatever, like the closer it is to banking, no doubt. It just
a
makes your
lot better.
story easier to tell. But nonetheless, to go back to your point, it is all about, especially as a lateral candidate, it is all about your
Yeah.
story
Uh-huh.
because they're going to want to know like why you want to do banking. Like, first of all, why didn't you just go into banking in the first place? Right.
That's the question you always get.
And then the second thing is like, okay, so now you're doing shareholder advisory or whatever else you may be doing. Why do you want to leave that? And why do you want to go into banking? And you have to have really strong rationale for that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times what you say that to that may not be like the actual reasons for why you want to go into banking, right? Because those are technically not like the appropriate answers to use in like an actual interview,
Yeah.
right?
What I learned kind of honestly, like, is a silver lining in all this that you can apply to anything across your career or life is like you can kind of guess what type of questions they're gonna ask you. I mean, you guys have a good way of teaching that type of stuff, but in laterals, like there's very specific there like this ones you just asked, like, well, why didn't you do investment banking right out of college? Why are you choosing it now? And these people, they interview so many people and if you just give like the cookie cutter answer, it's not gonna like I used to early on, like we were talking about luck, it meets opportunity, and like I used to do that. Like I used to give those answers, and obviously I want to make it very far. But if you kind of dissect, you kind of have to mirror or mimic whatever the culture of the firm is as well. And that's like a big thing you have to do through the networking process, which is why it's so important, and especially in the lateral process, like it's not very structured in and of itself. So you only get to learn the culture of a team through your networking efforts and talking to people. Like when I started to like see some more results and answering those questions was when I learned the real culture of the team, and I was able to parallel slash mirror my answer toward whatever the culture of XYZ firm was. And that's only that you learn that obviously through, I'm sure, like sophomore year, junior year recruiting as well.
Yeah,
But because there was just not any structure in the lateral process, these processes take like 6 months sometimes. I mean,
yeah,
the two ones I did were like minimum 4 or 5 months. And like,
yeah.
yeah, it teaches you
You're saying
patience too.
when you say the two that you did, you're saying to lateral from your shareholder advisory job to CIBC in the first place, and then again when you try to lateral from CIBC to DB, that also took like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because that's the other question that a lot of people always have when it comes to lateral is like people are used to this concept of a recruiting timeline because when you're recruiting for the junior summer internship, there's like this, pretty structured timeline that you follow.
yeah,
And then also when you recruit even for full time, most of the bigger banks, at least, they all go
yeah.
around the same time, like at the end of the junior summer, at the start of your senior year. For lateral recruiting, is there such a concept or idea of a recruiting timeline, or is it all just like very, I mean, you kind of already said it before, I guess, but like very unstructured and very ad
Mhm.
hoc? And if that is the case, like, how did you go about finding, I guess, both of these opportunities for like when you first got to CIBC and then also, now the DB one?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. But I'd like to give like a caution before I answer. Like in lateral hiring, there's just so many different factors and so many different situations. And also like people lateral for a lot. There's so many reasons why you would want to lateral too. So like my answer could be very different from other people's. Like there's so many ways and structures that these banks kind of go about their processes. So this is just kind of how it went personally for me. Ironically, both of them were pretty similar in my situation where I kind of gave myself like 6 months before I actually started interviewing to kind of like plant the seeds
Mm,
so that I had the connections whenever the openings were there and present for me to actually like execute in an interview process.
yeah,
And I found in the beginning to any lateral process is like you should give yourself a few months before you actually want to leave your firm. That's
right.
with any job in general, also. So the earlier is obviously the better, but you're not always fortunate in that sense. But like to me, if you give me 6 months to do anything, I feel like I can do it.
Mm,
And if I put my like all my time and resources to it, which obviously this is important, so you should be doing that. So when I'll walk you through, I guess my first process from the shareholder advisory to CIBC, I had reached out to different teams across the firm, like different coverages, different product groups, made a couple decent connections. And whenever I would see an opening or whatnot, like we had that type of rapport where like I had the referral set up, it's that part is pretty straightforward.
yeah,
It's more so like giving yourself the time to be able to have those connections and like most importantly stay on top of it, like keeping up with these people, like the reminders that like you're still looking. That was even more important when DB came along because DB's process was probably like a little more unstructured in the sense where, long story short, not to get into too detail about the side story, but DB, like they're doing a lot of restructuring since 2021 internally, right? So like
Yeah.
whenever I'd be talking to one team and they had an opening, like I'd be in that process and then they close that process. And then I'd have to move on through that connections I made from there. I would talk to other people and through the connections from there. So like there's a lot of unstructure within that too. Like so you have to be prepared for a lot, but more importantly, you have to be on top of it. Like, hey, like maybe that process ended up closing out for internal reasons that weren't in your control, but in the interview process, did you make a connection with someone? Why don't you follow up with that person and see what they know about? And it's a lot. It sounds a lot. It does sound a lot more exhausting than whenever I say it out loud. I promise it wasn't that exhausting. Like in reality, I'm sending emails, right? You know, like you're not. It's just reminding yourself to send these emails, and yeah, I kept logs too, like stuff like that, organizational things to really like kind of navigate myself through the lack of structure, if it's probably better
Yeah.
wording for it. But
I think to summarize kind of what you're saying, lateral recruiting is heavily networking based.
yeah.
And I'm curious about your experiences. I know what my experience was like. For both CIBC and the DB opportunities, were these jobs posted on their website? Is that how you found it, or were they not posted and you just heard about it because of your networking contacts?
Good question. CIBC was posted, but they were not interviewing people yet, and I was able to get ahead of that kind of. And then at Deutsche it was not posted at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, to your point, like you can get ahead of even sending the application part of it if you're on top of these connections.
You're saying for CIBC, you got into the process and you were already interviewing with them before they eventually posted the job.
Yes. No, no, at
Yeah.
CIBC it was already posted, and then
Okay.
that was for Deutsche. That was for Deutsche.
Okay.
What you're
Gotcha.
describing was with Deutsche. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because like just speaking from my own experience, when I lateraled from DB to MS to Morgan Stanley's tech group, that job was not posted either. And
Mm,
so I find that a lot of the times when there is a lateral opportunity, there's different reasons why a firm will hire laterals, but usually I would say it's either because someone left the group early, like
yeah.
if you, like, for example, you just left CIBC, they're probably going to have to backfill you, right?
Turnover
Um,
problem. Yeah.
yeah. So either there's turnover and which happens all the time in banking, by the way. Like
Yeah.
a lot of times people think they want to do banking and then they realize they actually don't because of the lifestyle or hours and they realize it's too much. Or sometimes like people get into banking and they want to go to a better bank, right? Like, so that happens
Yeah,
like
just
more
like
often
what
than you
you and
think.
I did.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like usually one reason, but it's unpredictable when that will happen, right?
Yeah.
I would say it's more common usually right after people get their bonuses for obvious reasons. And then the other reason is like if there's a significant change in market conditions. So for example, you like when I graduated, the reason why I collateral was because I graduated in 2008 and market conditions were really bad and a lot of these banks hired way fewer people. And then in 2009, the market suddenly started to rebound very quickly and deal flow started to pick up very quickly. And now all the firms were basically understaffed and everyone was getting overworked. And then so they're going to go out and find more people. So usually it's like something like that. Or I guess in DB's case, like you said, if there's some sort of restructuring, then there's
Yeah.
going to be more movement between groups in terms of like, oh, this group needs more people, this group needs less people, so on and so forth. Right. So I think the point I want to make though is that unlike the junior summer internship recruiting process where every single job is always posted on their careers page, that's not the case for lateral hiring. So like you really have to like the importance of networking becomes even greater. It is already really important for junior summer internships, but for full-time recruiting and especially for lateral recruiting, a lot of these opportunities you won't know about if you just don't know the right person in the right group at the right time. Meaning,
Yeah.
whatever group happens to have an opening, if you don't know anyone that happens to work in that group at the time, you probably won't hear about the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. And
It
that's
really is
this.
as simple as that too. Like I thought in college, like you just said, junior and sophomore year recruiting, there's all these applications. It's very like formal. Like you would think there's a lot of system to the process, but and then when you're on the other side of it, like it is truly like it's not as formal as you would think on the internal side what they're doing. Like I said, like I'd be in some processes and then they close it down and then move and then I'd have to like maneuver through that. So it I don't mean to say that to like sound discouraging. I only say it to be like even if it sounds like the odds are very low, I think I read somewhere like the percentage of getting in after is like some odd number. Like I genuinely don't pay attention to that stuff. Like I feel like kind of what I was alluding to before. It is in what you just said, it is so networking heavy, but at the same time, like if you do give yourself a certain frame, a time frame, XYZ 6 months, whatever, you can do it. You know, you just have to put in that legwork.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, we're not saying that to be discouraging, but it's more to set the right expectations. I'm sure when you were going through these processes and you feel like there's a lead with a certain opportunity at this group in DB, and then that vanishes or that gets filled or that process gets closed down. Of course, in the moment, that's very frustrating, right? But you guys have to expect that. It's not going to be like a super easy or straightforward process where you just go from like point A to point B. You have to expect, some detours along the way.
Yeah.
And most people let that kind of just discourage them and then they remove themselves from the process or they give up.
Yeah.
And in a way, if you have the right expectations and you're expecting that going in and you don't get discouraged by that, like the fact that the process is that hard is almost to your advantage because it's going to discourage all of your competition to
Yeah.
drop out of the processes, right? You just kind of have to be like the last man standing in some ways, right? Yeah.
I always say this now, you have to like prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And whenever I would get those like rejections or a process wouldn't go the way I wanted, like I honestly have such a short memory with that stuff. Like I move on really, really fast. And then whenever I would send any of these emails, like I would treat it like, yo, this could be my shot. Every single email would be like an opportunity. If you see it kind of like that, like, and you have a
Yeah.
short memory
Yeah.
whenever like quote unquote losses come, like it honestly, like it doesn't really boggle you down.
You can't get overly emotionally attached to any single opportunity because there's always going to be more opportunities, right? And like, I mean, I'm a big NBA fan. I'm watching the playoffs right now,
Yeah,
and my team's the Warriors. Steph Curry, like greatest shooter of all time, he has bad games sometimes, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And but like the next game, when the next game comes, like he's great again. Or maybe
right,
last game he's not hitting his threes. The next game he goes back to being like the best
yeah,
shooter of all. Like so, you just have to flush it down the toilet and keep going, right? And you just have to know you're not going to win. Even the best players in the world, like they don't win every single game. They don't hit every
yeah.
single shot, and that's not the point,
It's
right?
impossible too. Yeah, like you're
Yeah.
not gonna.
Yeah, and I think like going back to the one more thing on what you just said about just how hard it is to lateral in was like, yeah, it is hard. And yeah, I'm sure that I don't have the exact statistics on it, and but I'm sure the acceptance rate is not high because we're talking about investment banking and it's
Yeah,
not high in the first place. But some people look at that. In fact, I would say most people look at that and say, well, if the acceptance rate is that low, then I'm not even gonna try because like people are like scared to fail in a way,
yeah,
right? Most
yeah,
people are scared to fail to the point where they don't even try in the first place. And so you're like basically guaranteed to fail because you won't even take the shot. But some people look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, the acceptance rate is super low, but Sam lateral from DB to MS, Adib lateral from CIB to DB. So you're telling me it is possible. Okay, well, then, like, if they could do it, why not me? Like, it's two completely opposite ways of looking at the exact
yeah,
same thing, and you get to choose which perspective you want to have,
yeah.
right? Like that is a
You got to
choice.
focus on what you can control. Yeah, exactly. And like if I thought like it was super intimidating when I joined before and even during I joined the program, like the odds, like I was, everyone gets scared, but like if I let that fear take over me actually doing the work, I would have been still in shareholder advisory. Like I wouldn't have ever, I wouldn't be where I am now too. And like that's not to say like I have a lot more left to do, but yeah, then like I would still be in a different field.
Yeah, and I think most people in life in general are too risk averse. because I think that's just how our, mammalian brains are conditioned over thousands of years. It's like for survival, but you live one life, right? Like take that risk, like
Yeah.
ask that girl out, like
Yeah.
go for that job. That
Yeah,
is your
for sure.
dream job. Like what is the worst that could happen? That you fail, right? And if you fail, first of all, you most likely have learned a lot from the process and you would have
Yeah.
gotten better in the process regardless. But second of all, like, 60 years from now, when you're on your deathbed, you are not going to regret the fact that you went for it and didn't
Yeah.
make it. You are going to regret the fact that, I wonder if I could have married that girl that I really liked, or if I could have had that dream job as opposed to this mediocre job that I kind of dread going into work to every day. Like it's going to be woulda, coulda, shoulda because
Yeah.
you will never know because you didn't even try in the first place. And that is like,
Yeah.
in my opinion, much worse than knowing that, hey, I tried and I gave it my all and it just didn't work out. And sometimes it doesn't work out. I'm not saying it's always going to work out. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And so you get to choose like which kind of regret you want to have, I guess. Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about it.
I always feel like honestly, like I thought throughout this whole the payment for regret would be a lot worse than the payment of my fears. And I did this process, this whole, I guess, investment banking journey. It started in summer 2023, which is crazy that just sounds so weird to say, but even though it's like a short amount of time, I don't ever remember, like, I don't really think of the times I lost out on an interview or I didn't make the next round. There were a lot of those times too. Like, that is not the first thing that comes to my mind at all. Like, even though it took me months and there was months of hard work, like I don't see it as also a sad thing. I also like look back, I'm like, oh, like those are actually some good times. Like those are some highlights of my life when I like did some really cool things. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of hard work, but I don't think of it like I don't remember like late stressful nights. I more so remember like all the people I met throughout the journey as well. Like I met some really cool people, I made some really cool connections, like when it was an intimidating process. So I'd like reach out to people like you or in the chat and like even though y'all were busy, you guys would respond and give me great advice. So, I made like great connections throughout this. So I'm not remembering all the people who are inevitably gonna also be like not help you as much, but I'm remembering a lot of people who did help me and like
Yeah.
all the success as well within that.
Absolutely. The other thing I want to touch on too is you mentioned this concept of planting seeds up to 6 months in advance earlier.
Yeah.
And I like that term because I think this concept of planting seeds, what we're saying is with lateral recruiting and also with full-time recruiting, really like if after your junior summer internship, you want to go somewhere else for full-time, I think full-time recruiting and lateral recruiting is very similar in the sense that you don't know, it's not even, you don't know which firms are going to hire. You don't know which groups within which
Within the
firms
firm. Yeah,
are going to be
100%.
hiring, right? And so when we say planting seeds, what we're saying is you have to network with people like the junior summer internship where you're networking people because you know they're for sure hiring.
Yeah.
With lateral recruiting and full-time recruiting, you are networking with people without the guarantee that their group will even hire at some point.
Yeah.
And a lot of those networking efforts that you put in with people will not result in anything technically, at least in the near term. Like maybe further down the road, who knows, like if you especially build good relationships, but it's almost like a numbers game. Like the more seeds you plant, the more likely, like you just need one of them to turn
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
something,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing about like having the right mentality is, some people are like, oh, I'm going to only network with people once I see there's a job posted that they're looking
Yeah.
for a lateral. And a lot of times by then it might be too late, right? And like even
Yeah.
I don't like from my own process going from DB to MS. First of all, again, the job was never posted, but even then, the MS Tech group was looking to hire two people, which is actually a lot. Like a lot of times they're only looking to hire
Yeah.
one.
That's for two for one team is a lot. Yeah.
And the entire process from the time my acquaintance who was working at MS reached out to me to ask me if I was interested, from that until when I got the offer, well, actually, he reached out, asked me if I was interested. I said yes. Then the very next day, either the same day or next day, I had the phone screen with the staffer at MS Tech. And then that was the first round. And then immediately at the end of the phone screen, he knew if he wanted to invite me to Super Day or not. So he told me, okay, you're coming to Super Day. this coming weekend. And
Yeah.
then I went in that following weekend, and then they gave us the offer pretty much that very same day. And so the entire process started and finished in about a week.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane.
And so I'm not saying every lateral process is like that. Some will go
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
longer.
It's like what we were saying earlier, like there's so many different types too. I hear those stories all the time too,
Yeah.
like yours. Yeah.
And my point is just like, if I didn't know the acquaintance who told me about this opportunity, or if this job was posted, but I waited until after it was posted to start networking, it could be too late, right? And
Yeah.
so you just have to have this mentality where, hey, I'm going to network ahead of time, and most of this will not result in anything. But the more of this that I do, the more likely it is that I actually find the opportunities that do turn into something, right?
Yeah.
And then that leads me to my next question, which I think a lot of people have this question, which is since you were already working when you were trying to recruit for both of these positions, how do you manage that with networking? Like, are you networking during the day when you're at the office, or how do you manage the logistics of it? And then the second part is like, so let's say you're already at CIBC, and then now you're trying to lateral. How are you positioning that to the people you're reaching out to? Because when you're a student, you're reaching out, they understand like, oh yeah, you're trying to get a job. But when you're at a competitor and you're reaching out, are you telling them that you're interested in a job, or how are you kind of positioning that request, I guess?
Yeah, no, another good question. These were questions I also had while I was at CIBC. I think I was asking you guys too. So to answer your first question about actually the logistics of like working in banking and also networking at the same time. So what I would personally be doing is a lot of my networking that I did at CIBC also relied on my networking that I did the year prior to get the CIBC job because I had done a lot of like the legwork of reaching out to so many people. The first lateral process, a lot of those connections maintained throughout the next year while I was at CIBC. And also, I was reaching out to new people, not to say I wasn't. The way I was going about that is I'd like just kind of schedule send emails throughout the weekend and I'd space it out throughout the week so it wouldn't give me too many responses so I'd actually be able to hop on these calls. These people are also naturally busy, so they're gonna want to only do 15 to 20-minute calls. So like, I'd step out for coffee chats really quickly, like here and there throughout the day. Obviously, you have to be strategic. Like you don't want to you can't leave for like an hour or two during a banking job, right? So you have to be very cognizant of that. But it's not as scary as it sounds. Like I thought it would be a lot more obvious, but like one, your teams are also really busy, so it's like 15 to 20 minutes as long as you're not taking up too much of your day on coffee chats is I don't think it's crazy. To answer your second question as to how like I position my story as to like why I was lateraling from another bank, you have to be really sensitive about that question in the sense where like I have like a rule and a lot of this is intuitive to most people, but you'd be surprised a lot of people don't know this. You should never talk negatively about your current job. It's just like a terrible look. Thankfully, I kind of came in knowing that, but I hear this now, like whenever I see people lateraling into or trying to lateral into DB, or even when I was at CIBC, people trying to lateral into CIBC, like I'd hear people actually talk shit about their current company and like not even that I care. It's just like a lot of people will personally automatically just write you off like out of the gate. So it's a very sensitive. You have to
Yeah.
come into that question with a lot of thoughts. So the way I framed it was not anything about about my work at the current company. It was more so the direction of where like I wanted my long-term career to go. So if you
Mm,
frame it as in like I came into this, the way I framed it at least, like everyone's different, right? But the way I framed it was I came into this first year in banking wanting one thing, and now that I've gone through this year, I learned a lot and within that learning, I learned I wanted something else within banking.
yeah.
And this current role and capacity cannot give me that. Yeah, obviously I didn't say it exactly like that, but that's along the lines. Like I've heard people say a lot of now I like on the other side, I hear a lot of answers and like it makes me it's some of it are thought provoking. Like they'll be like the direction of senior management is kind of different than when I started, which is not where my long-term goals align.
Yeah.
I hear different variations. I think that's kind of, in my opinion, has been like the narrative that I think that like makes sense in these processes. Like a lot of these, especially at the Bulge level and elite boutiques, like the bigger banks, like they're gonna drill you on that. Like they want to know, like they're gonna know if you're trying to just give a politically correct answer as
Yeah.
well. You know, they're gonna ask you follow up. So it's gotta be like bold tight.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is such good advice because yes, there's one of the most common mistakes that I see people make. Just think about it, right? Like put yourself in your potential future employer's shoes. If you come across as someone who's just like complaining about this and that about your current job, and you come across as someone who is like ungrateful and has a terrible attitude, and why would I want to hire someone like that?
Yeah,
Right? Um,
yeah,
and so your reason for wanting to lateral can't be because you hate your current job. It has to be you really like your current job, but there's something more that you're also looking
mm,
for that you feel like you could get from this other place that you're trying to lateral to, that, or at least they would be able to offer more of that than whatever your current role is, right? And so I think that's a really important distinction that most people need to have. And that's like the why you want to lateral. But in terms of when you're reaching out to people to network, like let's say when you were at CIBC and you reached out to, and by the way, the other point that you brought up before I go there, the other point that you brought up that I think is really good as well is like, yes, like a lot of the networking contacts you have when you were first trying to lateral into CIBC.
yeah,
This is what I mean by like, even when you were planting seeds for that first process, a lot of those didn't really turn into anything immediately. But if you
exactly.
actually do a good job of not just being super transactional about the relationship and you actually keep in touch with those people and you actually nurture those relationships, which a lot of people don't know how to do that. And that's, part of what like we teach our students as well. But like, if you nurture that relationship, that's why I said earlier, it's like, you never know when
You
that's
never
gonna,
know. Like
that when
my
to come back
connections
around. Yeah.
from the first process didn't even help me with that one, but they helped me down the line in a year or two when I didn't even know I was gonna need it, you know?
And it's not because they don't want to help you, but when you first reached out, there wasn't an opportunity that they
Yeah,
knew about. But this time around, there happens to be an opportunity that they know about. So it's just like the timing has to be right as well, right? Um, but the other thing that I was going to ask is like, because you talked about how to frame the story, but in terms of like the why you're reaching out, like when you're at CIBC and you're reaching out to, let's say, the guy at DB and asking them to get on a 15 to 20-minute call, do you need to explain why you want to get on a call with them again, even though you're already at CIBC? Or is it just like unsaid and it's implied and people just understand? Or do you have to like, tiptoe around it because it's sensitive and you're already working at a competitor and you don't, like, how do you kind of help people think through that, I guess?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is the first part of it. The first part of my answer is going to be you kind of have to also read the room. Like whenever you're on these calls, that's something that you kind of also try to emphasize is like you have to kind of see like does the person sound like he's busy? Does he even want to hear your whole story? Like it's stuff like that. You know, that's stuff that you'll learn when you're doing these calls because you do so many. That's obvious. But the second one is I kind of learn in this is my personal belief and take. Obviously, other people will probably have different experiences with this, but I've always found saying less is kind of better. Not to say you shouldn't tell them or hide your intentions of latering. They know that you want that because why would you reach out to them, right? So that's why I always felt like I don't have to say too much. And then inevitably, if they do care to hear more, they're gonna ask, right? But I used to kind of blend it into my elevator speech, like the walk you through your resume type first thing in these calls, like networking, like I give them a quick background of myself in the last few like 30 seconds or so, I'd be like, yeah, and like I'm looking like into this because of X, Y, and Z reasoning. You know, like it kind of goes into my first point, reading the room as well. But yeah, to sum it up, I'd also felt like saying less is better also because I never wanted to box myself into one group too much. Because if I said too much and said like, yo, I really want to be in tech at this bank, and then they don't have a tech opening, but a healthcare opening happens, they're gonna be like, yo, this guy said he was so gung ho on tech. Why would I connect him with healthcare if he's not as passionate about it? So like that's why I say like saying less is kind of better because you don't know if something else is going to open up as well, right? So like you don't want to box yourself into one of these groups because like we were saying earlier, you have to plant your seed across the bank as well.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, that I agree with that 100%. And I think we've talked a lot about kind of like the networking process, how to get into these lateral processes. Obviously, that's, I would say, one of the hardest parts. Obviously, once you get it, let's say there is an opportunity and you do get to interview, that's the other piece of the puzzle. And we talked in the beginning a little bit about kind of like, the behavioral side of things. Obviously, it's going to be really important that your story is good. Or you have something prepared for why you want to make the switch, why you didn't just, start in banking in the first place, or etc. On the technical side of things, it's kind of like the last piece I want to talk about. Did you find that there was any difference with the two processes you went through, both like when first you were not in banking yet, and then you were trying to lateral into CIBC, versus this time when you were already in banking for a year and you're trying to lateral into DB? Were the types of questions that were being asked to you from a technical standpoint different? Like, did they get harder? Were expectations higher? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So at CIBC, I believe that a lot of my questions, like not a lot, but I had a decent amount more technical questions because they're still trying to assess if I'm ready for that world because I'm not in the world yet, right? I'd imagine it's more akin to kind of like the junior and sophomore year side of recruiting in that sense, where you get a little more of those technicals. I personally found, however, the lateral process going into DB from CIBC was actually kind of less technical, but more so they wanted me to walk through my deal experience. That's where the technical side was baked in. They want to hear more about my real technical experience because I had it at that point, and like obviously it depends on the group too. But yeah, I would be asked a lot more like walk me through this. What was your thinking behind that? Where are you getting that number from? Like why is the reasoning and thought process there? Just trying to see that through your experiences. And a lot of people find that like walking through your deal experience, especially after that year of not having technical round interviews, is also a good way of practicing technicals in general too, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think that was my experience as well. When I was trying to
Yeah,
go
I
from
was gonna
DB
ask.
to MS. It's silly to ask someone who's already been in banking for a year, like, "Oh, walk me through a DCF," or like, "Do you know what an LBO is?" Like, he's like, yeah, duh, right?" But in a way, it's more advanced in terms of like, because now you have to speak about those same things, but in the context of an
Yeah,
actual deal that you worked on. So it can no longer just be about memorizing the formulas or understanding why the formula is what it is, but it's more like
yeah,
real world applications. If I'm going to talk about valuation, it's like, sure, I know how trading comps work, but why did we pick these companies as the trading comps for this
yeah,
deal? And why did we say that this company should trade at the higher end of the range as opposed to the lower end of the range? And how do we justify that? And, or if we're talking about DCF, like what were the assumptions that went into DCF and, being able to back up the rationale. And so like, it's just, I feel like it's one level deeper as it should be because you're also more knowledgeable and more qualified at that point. Right. But really knowing your deals inside out, especially if you're going from like, one bank to another bank, I think that's something that's really important because a lot of times when you're going through banking as an analyst, because you're working so much, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of just, let me just process all these comments from my MD and try to get out of
yeah.
here, try to
You're
go
not looking
home.
at the bigger picture as much because you're so
Yeah.
ingrained in it. Yeah,
Yeah, and that is like, the bare minimum that you have to do. And you could get by and still do a good job just by doing that. But if you know you're going to be interviewing at some point down the road, you actually should be thinking about all the deals you worked on more like how your MD is thinking about it. It's like as an analyst, a lot of times the MDs are putting a lot of thought into like what goes onto the slides. They're drawing it out for you, and then you just have to process. But
yeah,
you should actually really sit there and stop and take some extra time to think about like, why am I doing this analysis? What is this chart or this table trying to say? And what is the overall story that we're trying to tell with this business, right? Because that kind of higher level strategic rationale, a lot of times is what they want to hear you talk about in these
yeah.
interviews, especially for the lateral interviews, right?
Percent, yeah. And like within what you're saying, like I kind of saw that even more like through while I'd go through not even just this lateral process, but across the board, right? Like I'm a victim of like really just not looking at the big picture a lot because I'm trying to go home, like it
It's
happens to
super
everyone.
common.
And like
Yeah.
a lot of people, well, a good piece of advice I got was you should try, which I didn't do before, but I want to start doing is like you should, whenever you do like a big deal or anything, you should like log it. So you're like remembering it. Like a lot of times we forget because you go through so many things in banking. So you don't like remember like the full deal you did like your first 2 or 3 months you were there. So like it's good to keep that login information.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, like nowadays, I didn't do this back when I was in banking, but now I keep a diary that I write in every day. And there's different things that I do in there, but it's like, I do like something I'm grateful for. That's just like a gratitude thing. I talk about, what are like the three things that I want to have happen today or that I want to get done that would make today a great day. But like at the end of the day, one of the things so there are things that I write at the beginning of the day, but then at the end of the day, one of the things I write out is like, what is one thing that I learned today? Right. And I feel like you can do something similar on the banking job, which is like, okay, I did all this work today. What is like, just, it doesn't have to be a lot, just one thing. What is one thing that I learned today? What, like, could be about a certain business, but like that actually forces you to actually think about what did I do today and did I learn anything? And it could be something super small. It doesn't have to always be like this huge groundbreaking thing. That's not going to happen every day. But I think writing that down also allows you to like go back and look at it later on. Like, let's say, okay, now interviews are coming up. You can go back and flip through your pages and be like, what did I learn, on all these projects that I worked on? Because otherwise, if you don't write it down, like, you're just not going to remember. You're doing so many things over such a long period of time, right? So I think that's really good practice. I guess, last question for you. As someone who's gone through the lateral process 2 times successfully and knowing what you know now, because hindsight is 2020, do you have any advice or like, is there anything that you would want to tell maybe the younger version of yourself who was when you were first just starting out and just going through this process and you didn't know anything about it? Is there anything you know now that you wish you knew back then that would have made your life a lot easier? Is there anything like that you could share with our audience?
So many things, but yeah, but a lot of it was sprinkled throughout this interview, which is good that we did talk about a lot of those points. I think like you talked about mindset earlier, even just now. Like I don't do what you do where I write it out every day, but I think everyone should do that. First of all, it's really cool that you do that. But I try to spend 5 minutes in the morning where for example, like I didn't do this when I first started, but CIBC, but now I'm doing it where like my first day, I wrote out a bunch of reminders to remind myself why I'm doing this, like why what is the reasoning behind all this? Like, what is my goal? We forget that a lot, and I think that is honestly the most important motivating factor, obviously, because it's the reason why you're doing it, but because we get so ingrained in the nit grit of our days and lives, you can forget it. Everything that we talked about throughout this call is, let me reiterate, those things are very, very important. Like, that'd be the first thing I'd say, but to not sound repetitive, I wish I did that earlier on, like the 5 minute thing where in the morning, no, like I prefer in the morning because like it kind of sets your tone. And now I like have my brain is kind of trained, so like I need to do a lot of things in the morning so that I feel productive. Like I do my workouts in the morning, so it kind of trickles down into my day. And as I go through my day, I feel like I'm accomplishing more. I should be doing a checklist like you, to be honest, but like like every win kind of motivates me for another one, and it makes the job a lot more digestible in a way, in the sense
Yeah.
where I mentioned this in our last call, but if it's up against you and someone else who genuinely enjoys the process and actually likes doing the process and the parts of the journey that are hard, and you're just indifferent to it, the other guy's gonna win every day.
Yeah.
And so just from having that daily reminder, so now in the morning I read that what I wrote out for why
Mm.
I'm doing this. I try to do that every morning, so it kind of reminds me. I think more stuff like that should be talked about too, like mindset. That's like really important.
No, that is really good because yeah, actually, I have something similar in my journaling process, which is like my daily affirmation, is what I call it, which is like just one sentence on my vision. And that vision changes over time because usually if you keep your eyes on whatever that vision is long enough, eventually it becomes reality. And then you kind of
Yeah.
move the goalpost again because now you have like a new vision, right? And so like my current vision is has to do with like where I want to take Wall Street Mastermind to, right? Like what is that next level for Wall Street Mastermind, which Wall Street Mastermind has already come a long way over the last 8 years, but
Yeah, y'all killing it.
thanks. No, but like, what is that next step? Right. And so writing that out every day, and it's literally the same sentence that I'm writing every single day
Yeah.
for usually at least months at a time, because that big picture vision is not going to change daily, or it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also keeps you motivated, like you said, because usually if you have big enough goals, it's not going to be something easy. It's going to be something that requires a lot of work, and it's going to be something that's hard. It's going to be something that requires you to have like multiple setbacks along the way, which is okay as long as you fall down, but you're falling forward, then it's all good. But when things get hard, if you don't, to your point, if you don't remember why you are doing all this, then
Yeah.
I feel like that's when a lot of people give up, right? Even when I was recruiting for banking, like I got rejected so many times
Hmm.
for full-time recruiting before I got to DB. I got rejected by over 20 different firms. And I feel like a lot of people in my situation would have given up after the fifth or eighth or 10th or 12th or 15th rejection, because every additional rejection, the doubt inside of your head grows a little bit louder. And you're like,
Yeah.
maybe I can't do this. Right. And the only thing that really kept me going was because I knew why I really wanted to get into banking in the first place.
Yeah.
And then that has to be bigger than just like, oh, I want to make lots of money. But it's like, well, why do you want to make lots of money?
Yeah.
Right? Like there has to be a bigger reason
It
behind
has
it.
to be.
And remembering that is what made me hang on and not let go of the rope until I eventually, finally broke through. And then like once I got my foot in the door, then like the rest was history. Right. So I
Yeah.
think your advice is really, really good. And so many people, like you said, so many people don't ever talk about like mindset stuff, but I find that that is like one of the most foundational things. Is if your mind
Yeah.
is not right,
100%.
nothing else you do tactically is really going to matter. Right.
Hmm.
But it's not the sexy stuff to talk about. So, man, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on for a second time to share your experience. Lots of insights and really useful nuggets, I feel like, that we shared on this call that I think will really benefit a lot of people as they think about their careers and how they might be able to break in, even if they're feeling a little bit late in the process right now. So, I think this is going to inspire a lot of people. So I really, really appreciate you for taking the time to do this, man. And again, huge congrats on all the success. Obviously, I think you clearly have a very mature way, I feel like, of going about this entire process and of just how you're managing your career. And I'm excited to see what you accomplish going forward, man. I think you're gonna do really, really great things.
Thanks, man. Yeah, likewise. I've had so much help throughout this whole process, so whatever I can do to help you, like others or y'all in general, not anything I could have done wouldn't have been possible without all the help, throughout the journey. So, yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, likewise. Appreciate the kind words. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up here. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this and learned a lot from it. We'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And thanks for tuning in. All right, cheers.